Hello, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending on where you're calling in from the world. My name's Mike Pino. It's my privilege to get to to introduce Professor Jeremy Kagan. But before I do that, let me just take a moment here to talk a little bit about what this today's about. Today is part of our lecture series that we've pulled together as part of the Cornell Senior Executive Leadership Program. And what you're going to hear a little bit more about is some of the kinds of concepts that we cover in the Senior Executive Leadership Program. Um, as part of today's call, I'm going to be very privileged to introduce Professor Kagan. He's actually participated in all aspects of entrepreneurial ventures. So, for instance, he's been an entrepreneur. He actually had a successful exit. He's actually been helped design and been part of accelerator programs. He's helped been part of judging programs and helped actually mentor various entrepreneurs. He's also been part of the investment side of the equation as part of a venture capital fund that was recently started up. But his research and his focus has been in particular space, which is really understanding how digital transformation and digital marketing has actually forced through the renewal has forced a way for us to actually think differently. And why this is really important for the Senior Executive Leadership Program is that as you think about becoming the leader that you need to be, there's a lot that we can learn from entrepreneurs. And that's actually what we're going to cover today. So without further ado, Professor Kagan, I'd like to pass the microphone over to you. And we're really excited. And I'm going to try to keep this as brief as possible so we can just go.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen while I'm introducing what we're going to talk about today. And I think the important thing to start with is that there's no possible way we could cover everything in the short time we have together. So I'm going to give you a whirlwind tour of some of the concepts of modern startup frameworks that we've been using to build some of the most successful companies of the last decade or so. And I will also warn you that as a New Yorker, I will talk fast anyway. So if you have any trouble understanding me or have a question, you can put it into the chat window or just wait to the end where we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So let's get started then and dive right in. As Mike was mentioning, I'm actually a professor, but my day job is actually a venture capital investor and former entrepreneur myself. I've been involved with a lot of companies, started the company pricing engine, and really have done a lot of work in the space. This makes me able to understand the founder journey quite well. And having done a lot of mentorship and sort of academic side entrepreneurship, I understand the sort of formal frameworks, but I also understand the practical realities of starting a company. So we're going to talk about just three key topics today. We're going to talk about what those frameworks are, and then I'll talk about some of what we call the artifacts, the things you can use as tools in the journey of a startup. We'll talk about customer discovery, which is sort of the key element of all of this, the idea that we should talk to our customers first before we invest time and energy. And then what does an MVP and TAM-SAM-SOM framework allow us to do to get that product further down the road? And I imagine you'll have a bunch of questions, so feel free. First of all, one of the things that we've learned is what we call the lean startup method. The lean startup method uses tools like the business model canvas, customer discovery, and the minimum viable product to do the opposite of the traditional model. The traditional model was, hey, let's start with a business plan where we plan out in meticulous detail all the things we're going to do over the next 5 to 10 years to launch this amazing product that we came up with on our own, deciding what's best for our customers. Kind of an ivory tower approach almost, where we basically say we're the experts, we can figure this out and make those decisions and then run through the plan, run through the playbook as you would. And the thing is, what we found out is that can be good, but it can also lead to spectacular failures. Really expensive, very time-consuming, career-busting failures. What if we did it the opposite way? What if we said, hey, what's a startup anyway? And so the lean startup insight is really, the lean part is spending as little resources as possible to figure out whether it makes sense to invest in this new idea at all. And the other part of it, startup, is also something that changed with the lean startup method. It was rethinking what a startup is. For many, many years, people thought startups are just like big companies, only smaller. And really, what we realized is that a startup is really a search organization. It's an idea in search of a scalable, profitable, and repeatable business model, meaning that we're starting out with just a good idea, but the most important thing is to see if it can be effectively translated into the market. Now, if you're a temporary organization looking to at some point begin becoming a big company, that also is important because we're not starting a small company to stay small. We're trying to do this to have a meaningful impact. And for a big company that makes a lot of money, meaningful impact can be quite significant amount of revenues. So what we're talking about with a startup is basically a search organization to find something elusive that will get us that confirmation we need to start investing the resources, both human resources and capital, to grow to a big organization or division. And that thing that we're looking for is something we call product market fit. Product market fit is a term that means when the thing we're trying to sell starts to get traction in that market. Now, that means that most of the time, we're going to be wrong. Startups are almost like testing organizations that go from failure to failure until something clicks. And that click is what we call product market fit. Because what we're doing really is learning. We're testing things, everything from mundane things like what features we have to what needs to be in the product for it to get traction and acceptance by the customer, to pricing models, and even the color of the button on the landing page. All of those things are tests we run. And if we think of it as a startup, a lean startup, being a testing organization that's looking for product market fit, it really changes the mindset. Because the thing about a test is we want to learn as fast as possible and move on to the next test. And that means we really realize at the end of all this, startups don't fail because of lack of technology or they use the wrong slogan. They fail because nobody cares. Nothing grows when they plant. The customers don't care. And that means we're not looking for just a product that's okay. It has to be good enough to distract people from what they're already doing and bring them into a new area. Because most of the time, it's not an engineering problem. When you launch a new e-commerce company these days, we don't have to figure out how to take credit cards on the internet. That problem has been solved a long time ago. We can just pay Shopify $8 a month and have a button that takes those credit cards. What we really need to do is figure out a product that people want to buy. And so we've really codified this into something called the lean startup method. It's a process for figuring out what customers really want through a continuous iterative process. And then once we hit that product market fit moment, then investing in growth. Now, many times that growth comes through venture capitalists investing the money, but whoever is doing the decision making, finding that elusive moment of product market fit is the critical piece. And you see two of the most important texts in this sort of movement right here. The original one I've had the good fortune to teach with both Steve and Bob, the Startup Owner's Manual, which is almost like a phone book of really amazing information on building a company using these methodologies, and the Lean Startup Method, which actually tries to translate this into more of an ongoing process and even bring this to bigger corporations. And Eric Ries is one of the grad students that used to work with the two guys on the left. So these are just references for future if you want to dig in deeper. But there's really a couple of basic principles. And Steve always likes to say there are no answers in your own head or in your own conference room. You got to get out of the building. And that means go talk to real customers. Find what's not working and fix those problems quickly because customer opinions are the only things that matter. In the Lean Startup Method, it doesn't matter if we have the best technology. It doesn't matter if we have a killer slogan or a really cool logo. What matters is, does a customer find value with what we're trying to sell them? And we test everything about that. Does the product have too many features, not enough features? What's the pricing? We start with what we hope is a repeatable, scalable business model. Because the product doesn't just have to be good. I hear lots of entrepreneurs pitching real solutions to problems. It also has to be something that a customer is willing to pay for. And that's really the key. That's what a business model is. And we often get so caught up in a cool, snazzy new tech that we forget that key principle. So what we're looking for is a feedback loop. We come up with an idea and we build as little as possible. We test that product, the minimum viable version of that product, and we see if it works. And usually when it doesn't, we say, well, what didn't work? Does it need another feature? Does it need to be iterated? We learn from that test and we go back with new ideas as to what might get out in the market. And this is part of a broader process, by the way. You've probably heard of or maybe even adopted agile development, sprint-based, prioritization-based development in your broader organization. That's great once you know what you're building. You might have adopted design thinking, which is a great way for trying to think about new creative ideas within constraints that might maybe resonate with your customers. But the process of building a business model to take that product to market is really what the lean startup is all about. And that's why it's that circular experiment, learn, build, and measure engine in the middle there. And the key to this is customer discovery. So customer discovery uses artifacts to figure what's happening. And it's a lot more than, hey, do you like this? Because what we all have learned is that if you ask someone who knows how hard you work and what you've been investing your time in, if they like something, they're going to say yes. It's how they're coming. There's no babies that aren't cute. Everybody's got a cute baby. We want to find someone who'll tell us our baby is ugly because we can actually iterate on this one. So we're looking for a big problem to solve, and we have to understand, is this a big problem for the customer? So when we do customer discovery, some people mistake this as a survey. Customer discovery is an open-ended interview process, talking to the people who, if we're right about the business problem, should care the most about that problem. And every problem has currently got a solution, however flawed. So if you are thinking about electric cars, you have to talk about what people are doing today. Are they driving a gas car? Or are they saying, I care so much about the environment, I take a bicycle to work? How do you solve the problem today? And where would you go to buy a new solution to this problem? Have you tried to solve the problem and failed? What do you need to make this a solution that works for you? This list goes on and on, but we find with customer discovery, it's often the things that we hear when customers are talking about the problem that really reveals new information. And this is where asking the wrong questions can take us down the wrong path. Now, the other thing we have to remember is, does anybody care? Are we solving a real problem? Are we solving a problem that the customer, the buyer, actually sees as a problem? And most importantly, do they have a budget to pay for solving it? Because we're not a charity here. Now, a lot of that is something that we'd have to go into in a lot more depth. But one of the ways to do this is say, well, what's our problem? Do we have a problem we need? Many of the best ideas come out of problems that the company themselves actually has. So for example, many of us are familiar with the product Slack. Slack is a really good business communication tool. What a lot of people don't realize is that was built when the company was actually a game development studio and they just needed a better tool to communicate amongst themselves for development. Turned out they folded the game development studio, but the tool that they built to make that work actually sold to Salesforce for billions of dollars. So sometimes it's not the idea you think you have, it's the one that you build. And ultimately, it's about, does this product actually solve the problem? Remember, technology doesn't solve a problem, it's just a tool in the toolkit. We have to build a product that uses the technology. And what we often find is we build a very primitive version, a minimum viable product. It's duct taped together. It's not good enough to pass muster. And the customer has such a big problem. They say, I want that, warts and all. One of the best things we actually find in the lean startup method is when a customer is complaining about our product, it means they're using it. And we can just improve the product and get better. That's where we have product market fit. So the problem with most people is we're not trying to sell anything in this first phase of the process. We're trying to learn. It's a very different approach. And if you're respectful of people's time, your customers will tell you where their problems are. Once we do that, we can start with a minimum viable product. And it may surprise you to see some of these companies started without the business model that makes them money right now. Google started out as a search box on a white page. They didn't even have ads. That idea didn't come for many years. Zappos actually started with a guy taking pictures in a local shoe store. And when people bought the shoes that they thought were his, he ran down there and bought them and then repackaged them and sent them to the customers. In other words, they did as little as possible and invested as little as possible to find out if people would use the core functionality of the product first. Would people search in a new way? Would people buy products online? And that's good, because when you ask people if they like something that's mocked up, they'll tell you yes. Most people are nice and they're not going to hurt your feelings. That's why a minimum viable product is the key. It's something we can put in front of people. It doesn't mean it's necessarily ugly, because nowadays you can make a very nice looking e-commerce store using some basic tools. But it doesn't mean we're going to do as little as possible on the back end. We may not have inventory. or full systems in place. It's just enough that early adopters can use it. And that brings us to things that you might not expect. Basics, like the original Yahoo page. This got people using it, so it doesn't have to look pretty. The goal is to find out if anybody cares. And the important thing is if there's customers with a real problem out there, they're going to use a product that isn't fully baked, that's not ready to go. These we often think of as the early adopters, but it's better to think of them as people who aren't just adopting for their own sake. They've got a problem that is so important to them. They're willing to take a product that's new, maybe from a startup they never heard of, or a brand that's brand new in the market, and they're willing to test it, often as beta customers, to help you make it better. That's how eager they are to buy. So we test and we test and test, and often we're wrong about that first thing. Maybe we get the pricing wrong, or we're wrong about the go-to-market or the target customer. And since you're mostly wrong, this is a problem for most corporations. Corporations are used to planning, and being right. The fear of failure is what's the problem. One of the most important successes in the Lean Startup method is definitively proving that an idea is bad and never doing it again. That can be considered a success. But how many people in your company get promoted when they tell you, you got to shut down my project? That's a change in the culture that many have to examine. But we just do it again and again until we find success. Now, we've got a bunch of tools that I'm going to flip through just so you can see what they are. We can start with design thinking. This is a way to figure out what people want by almost being an anthropologist in a consumer's living room or in a business's problem set. We have ways to think about the customer's problem using a value proposition framework. This is called the value proposition canvas. And what we're really thinking about in this case is, what is the customer trying to do? The jobs to be done framework essentially thinks of new products as having to come in and get the old product fired. We have to go in and say, why am I going to fire my gas guzzler car and hire an electric vehicle to do the job? And that means recognizing the pros and cons, because we're not just targeting a demographic. Customers don't buy because they look like customers. They buy because they have a problem to solve that our product does just a little bit better, or hopefully a whole lot better than the way they solve the problem today. And once we do that, we can begin to design a business around it. And that uses the most important tool to come out of the Lean Startup method. This tool is the business model canvas. Now, this is basically for any company. It could be a project in a big company. It could be a startup itself. We put the entire company on one page with 9 basic building blocks. The whole company. This way, we are all literally on the same page. This is when you see people doing the whiteboarding and everything. What we're trying to do is come back to our best guesses about what we're doing. And this is where we start our testing process. Because what we're looking to do is put the whole company on a page. We test everything: key activities, the value proposition itself, how we're going to go to market, and so on and so forth. And this is what gets us to where we're going. You might say, but I need to say so much more. If we can't summarize the key value proposition, the why is this product something that people need to buy, we're never going to get further than that. Each of these might be nothing more than a bullet point that we assume is true. And the most important thing is that these bullets should be testable or validatable in some way, through research, or ideally through talking to customers through the customer discovery process. So I have a short video here that will explain this, and then we'll wrap up.
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. The channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. The customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. The key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
And that is really the key. We are trying to get to that point where we have a whole business mapped out on a page. And that means we think we know what we're doing. But remember, all of these are hypotheses. They're our best guesses what the customer wants and how we're going to get there. We haven't tested any of this, so really they're just fancy guesses. This is also a challenge for big companies because they're not used to operating in an area of uncertainty where they're going out specifically to prove or disprove the model itself. So remember that the business model canvas is a tool. It represents your best guesses to put an entire proposed business on a page and map it out. The bottom, of course, the cost and revenue streams, this is the basis of your financial model and forecast. The top left is really about how you're going to go to market and make the product. But the key thing is the value proposition section in the top right. What we're doing, how we're going to get it to the customer, and who's going to buy it. Now, there's only one other thing I'd like to make sure we talk about before we wrap up and take questions. And I just want to point out that when we say minimum viable product, we are not saying a broken product or a piece of a product. It's a bare bones solution, but it can look good. It has to be enough to solve the value proposition for early customers. Not every customer, but the ones for whom the problem is most serious. And it's got to be something customers can react to. So that means it's not just a wheel as part of a bigger car. It's thinking about, if I'm providing a transportation solution, what's the simplest way that I can get there? So, and this is just illustrative, but if my plan is to build an electric car, I might start with a scooter or an electric bike to start capturing customers for whom the priority of sustainability and electric propulsion is the most important. Now, this is just the way we think of building towards the goal. If we just build a piece of a product, we won't get clear feedback. We need to get clear feedback to know we're on the right path. And so a minimum viable product is the least amount of work that clarifies the value we think we're bringing to the key customer segments. And we can do it with a simple, easy to build website or go-to-market strategy. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about, but for now, I think we'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions. So that's what I have for you today. If you need more resources, I'm happy to provide some links or thoughts on that. Any questions?
Thank you, Jeremy. So far, we actually have we have several hundred people in attendance right now. We have three questions that are already keyed up. The first question that came in actually is this: what are some of the challenges of implementing this entrepreneurial mindset, that is the business model canvas, and trying to actually do this inside a large organization? How does this work? I mean, it's easy to talk about it as an entrepreneur. How would you do this inside a large organization?
Well, large organizations have a big challenge, and it's usually cultural, in that testing and failing at something is seen as a failure rather than a success in avoiding a major, messed up product launch or investment for no reason for a company. So we need to change, especially our innovation culture, to recognize that we need to test and make sure that the market accepts what we think is a good solution. It also allows us to recognize that in most organizations, no matter how smart they are, the truth is that many of the smartest people in your field won't work for you. Bell Labs was probably the number one telecommunications company research think tank in the world. And yet in 1980, they thought that there would only be 1 million people using mobile phones in the year 2000. So the smartest people in the world may be at your organization, but they're not the only people. We need to get the ideas from everywhere. So it's about being a little more open and having a culture that recognizes that a successful test often proves that something doesn't work, which currently we might perceive as a failure for innovation, but is actually a success in preventing the company from wasting time and resources down the wrong path.
So in a certain sort of way, what I'm hearing is that it's designing the hypothesis so that you learn faster. It's not about failing faster, it's about learning faster. And the real trick to become actually very successful about using this entrepreneurial mindset inside an organization is to help understand what we need to learn and how we need to learn first. And using this kind of mechanism to actually drive that kind of conversation. Is that a fair restatement?
Yeah, it is. These tools are designed to allow us to do that process as quickly and sort of objectively as possible. When we're talking to customers, we're asking them open-ended questions so that they're telling us information rather than we're confirming what we think we know. All of these things are designed to do this in a rapid and iteratable way so that we can continue to develop as fast as possible. When Facebook says move fast and break things, that's kind of what they mean. They know that not everything's going to work, but we're going to learn from those experiments. And we see this a lot in more technical fields like rocket launches. Those rockets blow up a lot, but each one leads us to landing on the moon.
Mhm, mhm. The second question that came in is from Ronnie. This question is, what advice would you give to organizations that are just starting to explore the concept of an entrepreneurial mindset?
Well, I think the most important thing is to recognize that it is not simply emulating what we see startups doing. It's not about bringing your dog to work or having free snacks in the kitchen. It's really about the mindset of trying new things and accepting this process as a learning experience. And learning experience means that a lot of what we think is true is going to prove wrong. A lot of the initial customers might not be the ones that we end up with. For many companies, this means that we have to really rethink what we consider success. And success is a successful test. A product launch can't be scripted in advance in a truly innovative world. With the pace of innovation increasing, that means that we can actually learn faster, but it also means that many of those experiments will fail. So it's about cultural change, not the trappings of innovation.
Gotcha. And so in that way, it's as a leader, you also have to you're not accepting failure as much as you're actually advocating for people to learn faster because we can't afford to take forever to learn. And so it's changing the way that people think about this. Instead of it being thought of as a failure, it's thought of as learning faster to move faster.
Yeah,
Um,
success isn't getting the customer we think is the customer to like the product we think is the right one for them. It's finding out who the customer is and what the product should look like. So
mhm,
it's a
mhm.
discovery process, not simply like a beauty pageant.
And we're getting to the edge of time. And one more question just is queued up, and we have a couple more other here. This one comes from Samir. What specific takeaways from this webinar can Cornell SELP participants expect to implement immediately in their organizations?
Well, I think the first step is to realize their limitations. What can we do? What can we implement? And then begin the process. When you're turning a battleship, it takes a long time. So big companies are big for a reason. They're successful. So naturally, they're going to protect the things that make them successful. All of the systems of large companies are there to protect the crown jewels, as it were. What we have to recognize is there's an area of innovation where many of these ideas aren't going to fail. Most venture capitalists know that only 1 in 10 is going to be a huge success. And those are the guys who do it really, really well. So we have to learn to accept that part of the process of getting the successes includes the tests that prove that we're going the wrong way.
There are we're now at the edge of time, and the last question, and really just to sort of, I'm going to reflect it back just to make sure I understand it properly. So
Mhm.
when people go through this program, and this is one of the modules in the program, and they start to learn about the entrepreneurial mindset, and one of the real challenges is how to actually bring that. Some people call it the entrepreneurial mindset, but it's really about how do you think differently about what it is to actually produce outsized success. And so that outsized success is about setting things in motion where you're testing and learning as fast as possible and doing it methodically. Is that sort of, and this process is a way to actually help you become methodical about it and also make it easy to teach others to participate with you and build the team and build the culture and build the trappings to be successful. Is that sort of,
Yeah, and I think for senior executives, they can also break down innovation into two different or three different categories. There's a couple of much better thinkers about innovation than I, but the key thing is incremental innovation, like new features and stuff. This is something that companies are great at, coming out with new versions, updating the technology. It's the truly blue ocean stuff, the stuff that's really groundbreaking and new, that might be major disruptions. That's very hard for companies that are entrenched in the existing structure to really value or push for. So it's in a way, the innovation we need to change is the stuff that's truly groundbreaking. And that sometimes takes a bit of a separation because it might threaten the existing businesses. So I think from a perspective of a senior executive, putting those kinds of innovation into different buckets and recognizing where we need to take some more risk is the truly blue ocean stuff. And the incremental stuff, you don't need to change the process as much. It'll help make those decisions a lot more clear.
in that way, that's sort of like your Bell Lab example that you gave earlier, that they couldn't see that the cell phone in 20 years was going to be more than 1 million users in the year 2000. And these were the best thinkers of the time. Just like at Kodak, where they invented the digital camera, they thought, well, this isn't, no one's going to want it, that everyone's going to want to use film and no one's going to want to have a digital camera. So we're just going to sell this, right?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges for companies is their customers usually love the existing product. And what's hard to see is what's not there. All the customers for whom this product isn't the right solution, and there may be a lot more of them. So there could be a lot more people for whom a mobile phone, given a lack of infrastructure, for example, in all the other parts of the world that weren't sitting there with wireline phones, those customers were not being served. And it's really hard to see what's not there. Remember the iceberg, you see the 20% above the water, 80% of it is below the water, and that's what takes down the ship. So we have to look in some ways at the white space in our market and say, why are all those people who don't buy our product not buying it? That can be a very big challenge.
So, and we're going to end on that. That is an absolutely stunning observation. Thank you so much, Professor Kagan. Really appreciate it. And for folks, Professor Kagan's part of the Cornell Senior Executive Leadership Program, and this is actually one of the modules in that. And very thankful for your time today, and thankful for everyone on the call. Have a lovely day.
My pleasure. Have a great one.
Bye bye.